Hello, friends. Uncle Marv here with another episode of the IT Business Podcast, your podcast for IT business support. If you do any type of networking for business, small business, enterprise, if you are a solo tech, managed service provider, anything that has to do with that, this is the show for you. If you are watching, this is the weekly live show. We broadcast every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. on YouTube and the Facebook, sometimes even to the LinkedIn. But if you're watching live, you can see to my right or stage left, Bryan Barnhart is with me in studio, our second ever in studio guest. Bryan, how does that feel?
It's very cool. I didn't realize that.
Yes.
So honored.
We
Very
keep
honored.
that a secret so that people don't bum rush the studio. So Bryan is with us from Infosec Cyber and is a fellow Florida man.
Yes, I am.
You're a real Florida man.
I'm a real Florida, born and raised.
Born and raised. And actually, if I remember correctly, born in Fort Lauderdale, right?
In Fort Lauderdale. That is correct.
Oh,
that is
yes.
correct.
So Bryan and I hung out a couple of weeks ago when Stan the Man was down here, and we talked about some of those days. You remember the real spring break days?
Yes. Right. Back in the days of summers and the candy store.
Absolutely.
The button. Way back. The button. Right. Right. For sure.
We'll get into that a little bit later. Folks, tonight we are going to be talking about cybersecurity, but from a much different perspective. Most of us try to do what we can in educating our customers and, doing all the phishing tests and 2FA and stuff like that. But Bryan's going to help us understand what we really should be talking to our customers about. So, Bryan, look forward to that.
No, I'm excited.
All right. Well, first thing I want to do, as my notes are all messed up, is I want to get into a little bit of news, because one of the announcements that I want to make is that next week, the show will not be on at its regular time. Normally, like I said, Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. However, next week, because it is the week before Thanksgiving and the week before Black Friday, we are doing a Black Friday preview, and that will start at 10 a.m. and it will go for maybe 2 hours, and I will have two great people with me to go over a lot of gifts and tech things that you can buy. And Emily Lawrence of Tech Gadget Canada is going to join us, along with Eric Pinto from Sock Solder. Eric joined me last year when we did Two Black Men, One Black Friday. That's the title of the show.
Wow.
And that is going to be probably the only time ever that we will actually dedicate the entire show to having you as the listener support the show. It's basically my webathon, where I say, hey, please go buy this item from Amazon, because if you do, we get a little commission, and that comes back and helps support the show. I know you're going to shop on Amazon anyway, so why not use the links that we provide and do that? There's no additional cost to you, so it's not like you're spending more to help the show. It's the same cost. Amazon just gives us a little bit of affiliate commission back to us. But the reason I mentioned that as part of the news segment is that Amazon has been in the news. I don't know if you know this, Bryan, but Jeff Bezos, who used to be, or was the founder of Amazon, but kind of stepped down last year, but he's still on one of the committees, and he is telling everybody to batten down the hatches and be prepared for a recession, and don't spend so much money, from a guy who wants us to spend money.
Right, that owns a shopping medium.
Yep, and so Amazon stock was down something like 42% last Friday. Now, I don't play the stock market, but I do know that there were some numbers that came out, the official numbers. So Amazon made $127 billion this year. Now, that was up 15%.
Okay.
But their net profits
are down
2.9 billion, or 28 cents a share. So kind of interesting. However, their AWS service, which most of us utilize in some form or fashion, 20.5 billion, and that was up 27%. So that is still their most profitable cost center or whatever they call their division there.
Makes sense.
But here's what Amazon is really hinting at. They are forecasting their fourth quarter profits to be zero.
Exactly zero.
That's what they said, zero. So I don't know if that's true, but I am going to say still, as you're listening to the show next week, 10 a.m. Eastern to 12 noon, follow our links, go to Amazon and purchase. And see if we can make them $100 next week. So we're going to get into the Florida Man news a little bit later in the show, Brian. I'm going to ask you some questions about that.
Okay.
So why don't we get to what I think the listeners really want to hear about? And the fact is, you do cybersecurity, but in a much different way than most of us are used to.
Right.
So first of all, I need to let people know. So Infosec Cyber, people that knew you 2, 3, 4 years ago, it's not the same name.
No, it was Infiltration Labs.
Yeah.
Infiltration Labs. So if you want a little background, I probably shouldn't be sharing this on the air, but really the name change spawned from nobody knew what Infiltration Labs meant. It had no direct connection to cyber, to the point of I had a small business accountant some years back who invited me to a networking event. And when I showed up, everybody started asking me, "Are you the water filtration guy?"
Yeah.
Like, water filtration? No, I don't do water filtration. So that kind of spawned the name change.
So Infosec, people probably still don't know what that means.
They still don't.
But you threw in the cyber.
I did.
So that kind of...
I had to have a buzzword.
Yeah. All right. So a complete rebranding. And now let me see if I get this right. Because a lot of us in the industry mistake what you do in saying that you're all about cyber protection, but that's not true. There's two parts to your business, as I understand it. One is the education side, which we all would love to do, but then there's the dirty side, I should say. I don't know why I was going to say good.
Right.
Good in terms of money, but the dirty side, where a lot of people come to you after the hack.
Correct. So you figure whereas a lot of cybersecurity, they focus on the protection, right? We're going to put stuff in place to help prevent and protect you against, and I guess for all intents and purposes, I'm not protecting initially against anything. The two sides of the coin that I am is after an attack, right? Or after an incident, I'm the guy that comes in and I'm going to do the analysis and help you identify what happened, how it happened, what the full scope is. Why is that important? That's how you minimize the impact. You minimize the cost and the downtime by identifying. The sexy side of what I do is the penetration testing.
Okay.
Right? That's the coming in as the hacker, if you will, to expose and identify where you're vulnerable.
Now, obviously, that's the ethical hacking, right?
It is, yes.
Okay.
Yes, ethical hacking. Correct.
And is it full penetration testing? Because the reason I ask that is I know that a lot of us have these companies that will offer, as part of our cybersecurity stack, and we'll offer pen testing. But really, to me, they're more like vulnerability scans where they're just scanning the IP and that's it. They're not truly penetrating. So,
correct. So the easy distinguishing factors there is if you're using an automated tool and it's just scanning, we'll say IPs or endpoints, that's a vulnerability scan.
Okay.
Right? A penetration test is we will start off with doing a vulnerability scan, but then once we've identified where there's potential vulnerabilities, now we need to verify, right? Or check and make sure, was that a false positive? Is it a false negative? And if it's reporting that X is exploitable, can I actually exploit it? Can I hack into it, if you will?
Okay. Now, here's part two to that question, and then we'll circle back around. Most of my clients don't want to pay for a penetration test.
Nobody wants to pay for it.
They don't want to pay for a vulnerability scan. And from what I understand, a true penetration test is pretty pricey.
It's costly because it's not, and I think that's where the big confusion is you hear a lot of people ask, how much does a vulnerability scan cost? You really can't just ballpark that, or you can ballpark a vulnerability scan, because it's an automated scan.
Right.
I just need to know the number of IPs, what we're expecting to see there, click go, done. Whereas with a penetration test, you really do need those human eyes to kind of peek and see, like, okay, how else can I try to exploit the service, or what else is there, right? It really requires that human interaction to poke and see what's there, and that's where the cost comes from.
Okay. Now, I probably can't ask you to divulge too much legally. Don't want to get anybody in trouble, but I have to assume that you get into some stuff.
I've done some cool, what I think are some sexy penetration tests. So do I have time for a quick story?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, tell us.
doesn't happen often, but every now and then we get what's called a physical penetration test, which is where they want, or a red team test, we'll call it, which is where they don't just want to test the computer environment or the network environment. They also want to see what damage could be done if somebody had physical access to our systems or our environment. So some years back, we were engaged to physically break into a bank in some podunk town. And that was, we'll say it was interesting. We were successful breaking into the bank. But the reason I say it was interesting, here's the funny part of the story is I was shadowing a guy. I was training with a guy on the physical pen test. And at one point we're there at 3:00 in the morning. I'm like, we're just going to pick the locks and go in. He's like, yeah. He's like, but don't worry about it. You've got your get out of jail free. All right. We've got an authorization form. So if the cops show up or something, I'm like, oh, okay. Well, being retired law enforcement, the cops probably aren't going to come in. They're probably going to send K9. And I don't know that K9's going to stop to read the form, right? Probably doesn't care who signed that form.
Now, okay. So let me understand the physical penetration. So that to me sounds like, can you just break in and bypass alarms, key codes, and stuff like that? I mean, is that really part of the cyber stuff in terms of, I mean,
yes. So yes and no.
Okay.
Right. So if we were just breaking in, then there's really not much value.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Someone can shatter your window and break in. Where the value comes from is trying to identify failures in processes.
Okay.
Right. So if I manipulate your lock on your front door before the business closes at the end of the night, is someone going to test that? Or can I come back at midnight and just walk in? Right. Once I get in, is there any sort of alarm systems inside that are going to alert to my presence? When I get to your computer, am I going to find computers that are unlocked? So almost like in the cyber world, where it's that layered defense, right?
Okay.
We have firewalls, intrusion detection, so on and so forth.
So that's more what I was thinking of. Let's say the cleaning crew is walking through. Can they just start pecking away at somebody's computer? That's kind of what I was thinking is the physical testing.
Absolutely. And that's part of it as well.
Okay.
Right. Clean desk policy, right? Do we have stuff with passwords on the monitors or on our keyboards? Or...
So I had a client today. So they, let's see, the first way to explain this. So part of them are working remote and part of them are in the office, and they're actually sharing office space.
Okay.
So one person's physically at a desk, and then an outside person they're not sharing the computer, they're sharing the desk. So there's two computers, KVM switch, so that they can switch back and forth. Well, today they both showed up. And so the one person went to another computer, and I got them to remote into their computer, whatever. And then they wanted to switch. I don't know why. And so the person that came to the desk at the second time got locked out of her profile.
And they weren't logging into the same system?
So yes, I knew I was. So they called me in a panic. She's like, I can't get in. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, come in. And she had done something wrong, and her password, after I think 5 attempts, is when they get locked out.
Okay.
I said, oh, you're locked out. Let me unlock you. So I said, first, did you log out of the other computer that you're on? And she's like, oh, no. And so I hear from across the room through the phone, what's your password? And she yells it across the room. And I'm like, that's not legal.
Everybody's so concerned about like the 0 days and the, I'm using air quotes, the sophisticated hacks. And really most attacks are default passwords, weak passwords, some service that's open to the internet that just shouldn't be.
Naked RDP.
Yeah.
We've got a comment in the chat here. The cleaning crew knows the passwords. They will see them under the keyboard without dusting.
Right. If you have issues logging in, call the cleaning crew. They probably got you.
I know what a Mr. P just keeps his passwords. So,
absolutely.
So a second part of the physical penetration, part of me was thinking of, do you do what was that movie? Sneakers with Robert Redford. Did you see that?
I did.
When they're penetrating into buildings and walking physically in and seeing if they could bypass stuff and seeing if people will let them into places they're not supposed to go. Do you ever do that type of thing?
So the funny thing is that's the sexy part of doing penetration testing or physical penetration tests. And the reality is almost nobody ever engages for that. I think for a couple of reasons. I think there's probably some liability issues there.
Okay.
And I kind of how you started the conversation initially, where how does that correlate to cyber, right? I don't think, just the sad truth, we just don't get.
But they watch the movies, they get past it, and then all of a sudden they're in the server room, which it always amazes me how there's never a tech in the server room in these movies. Big server rooms,
right?
No tech.
It's empty.
So, not mine. Mine are all stuck in a closet or in a bathroom. Servers are never left alone. Oh, man. All right. So the physical, and then the vulnerability testing. Now, the other part of that is, because your company is described also as digital forensics.
Correct.
Which to me is more of digging deep into the information to see what happened. Scouring logs, recovering data, that sort of stuff. Am I right?
Absolutely. Spot on. So we typically say DFIR, or digital forensics incident response.
Okay.
So the incident response side is obviously there's some sort of a cyber event, we come in. It's the digital forensics, that methodology of knowing how to collect the data, how to triage the data, how to interpret the data. And I think I'm jumping around here, but that's probably the biggest piece of digital forensics is, let's be honest, anybody with a bunch of money in their pocket can go out and buy digital forensic tools, right? Or take a couple of classes and learn
there's
how
some
to
free
do
ones.
Yeah, and there's some free, right? No, and the funny thing is, some open source software I think is better than the commercial stuff. But it's knowing how to interpret that data, right? It's one thing to see that this log says X, but what does that actually mean, right? So you really have to correlate that and take other pieces, other artifacts, we'll say, from the system to be able to paint a clear picture of what happened.
Now, one of the things that I run into a lot of times is we as techs don't always set up the server logs properly. Because if we did, that's a lot of logs. And I know a lot of techs will turn off logs because they want to dumb down the noise.
Mm-hmm.
So now when you're going in after the fact and you're looking at those forensics and stuff, do you have trouble getting information because people like me didn't turn the proper logs on?
Absolutely. And that's probably one of the biggest frustrations, not just for me as the digital forensic examiner, but for the client, right, or whoever the victim is, and IT, right? So typically it's after the fact. That's when they usually kick themselves and go, oh man, it created noise, but we wish we'd had it, right? It's one of those things, I'm trying to think of an analogy, but something that's inconvenient now, right? But minimally, but by not doing it later, that inconvenience is way more significant.
Okay. Now, do you have like a typical checklist that you would give people like us to where, okay, at the very minimum, you got to be doing this. And I know that the insurance companies are doing us a solid this year and making our customers keep logs and multi-factor and all that. But a lot of the stuff that I've been doing is turning on, obviously a lot more log on log off events,
Right.
a lot more failed attempts, and it is causing a lot more work. But those are the things that I've been turning on at a minimum that I need to have more visual, looking into. What else would be something that we would need to turn on?
So like process tracking,
Okay.
object access. I could probably rattle through a bunch of stuff. It really depends, I would say. So from a forensic standpoint, I'd rather that you had everything,
Turn
right?
it
I
all
want
on.
the whole caboodle. But I get that in some environments it's just not realistic. So I think that's probably like anything else. You'd have to kind of triage that from an IT perspective and determine what. So I've been asked a bunch of times, hey, do you have like a checklist or things that you would must-haves in a forensic examination? And I haven't put anything together yet, but now that we're on the air, maybe I should.
Hey,
Put something
I
together.
give good ideas.
Yeah.
So, because that's the thing. That's what I would want is, here's the problem. You can't make it a minimal because then that's the least we'll do.
Right.
It's almost got to be, not turn everything on, because I think most of us are outside IT, and one, the client isn't going to pay for us to keep all that. We got to store it someplace to keep the logs. Somebody's got to look at it. So you got to pay people to do that, or send it off to one of our partners or vendors that has a knock or a seam that they're doing it for us. That costs money. So I wish there would be at least some sort of a checklist, like a, small, medium, large.
I'm gonna put something together. I'll
Okay.
put something together. But just to kind of tackle that a little bit, I think kind of the happy medium there might be, yes, obviously if you're collecting these logs, ideally there's somebody that's periodically reviewing them, right? Or some sort of automated process that's reviewing them. And there's a lot of security products that do that. But I think even if that's not what's happening, even if they're just being logged, right? And then offload, maybe stored somewhere for up to a year, just having them, I think kind of
So the
helps out quite
the
a bit.
syslog that we're told to always do.
So here would be the freebie.
Yeah.
Is and it's funny. I'm surprised not more people, or that more people don't use this. Is Sysmon, right? And to be fair, I'm not an MSP. I'm not like an IT administrator. So maybe there's a reason, but Sysmon, it's a free tool from Microsoft, and it turns your event logs on a Windows system. We'll say on steroids, but it's configurable. So you can log. It allows you to put rules in there to remove the noise. But I don't think I've ever had a situation where I've come in and they've had Sysmon running in the environment and I wasn't able to answer all or most of those pressing questions.
So I remember Sysmon.
It's still being developed. They're still maintaining it.
But so again, that's probably, I do remember turning it on. It was like too much, because you've got to increase the log size. First of all, the default, it's the thing. Microsoft should do a better job and just raise the default size for the log files, and don't make us have to go do it.
Right. So that might be one of the updates with Sysmon. So I'm fairly new to Sysmon, just a few years back. But by default, if you just run Sysmon, yes, it just starts logging everything.
Right.
But you can run it with a specific configuration file to only log certain things, and then also to remove other things. Right. So it kind of clears out the noise, if you will.
All right, I'm making a note to go back to Sysmon, because it's probably been.
I'll send you a configuration. I'll
Okay.
send something out.
That'll work.
I've sent it to a couple of people.
If anybody's listening and would like that, just send me a message and let me know. Or if you know Bryan, send him a message. But maybe I'll make that available to the listeners here. That'd be great. But yeah, Sysmon, I remember that, and it was actually pretty easy.
Yeah.
So
it's a single command line. It's just sysmon-i for the configuration file.
Yep, that'll work. All right. Do you have? I'll ask this at the risk of getting no answer. Any great stories you can tell of the worst thing you found?
The worst thing I found.
Yeah, just if you do a penetration test and got in there and like, oh my goodness, why is this on your servers? Or you've been hacked for the last year. Did you not know?
Oh gosh. So going along that path. We'll stick with that.
Okay.
I've had a few where we went in, did the analysis, pointed out, here's how you got compromised. Here's what they did. Here's the accounts that are compromised. Here's what you need to do to move forward. And I want to say it was less than 6 months later, we got the call back. We go there to do the analysis, and literally they hadn't done anything.
Nothing.
The usernames that were the administrative usernames that were compromised, they never changed the password. So that was pretty egregious.
So let me get this straight. So they called you to do a pre-analysis?
No, so this was they got compromised.
Oh,
so they were hacked.
Okay, they did get hacked. Okay.
Right. And this is when I did PFIs, or payment card industry forensic investigations.
Okay.
So this means that it was a point of sale system, right, or a credit card environment that got compromised. So we came in to do the examination on that, and pointed out, hey, here's what got compromised. Here's the hundreds of thousands of credit card numbers that have been stolen from the environment.
And
they did
then
nothing.
6 months later, they called you back
They got called again
because
Yes.
they got compromised again.
Yes. So realistically, I don't think they got compromised again. They never closed the holes in the first compromise,
Okay. Well,
but they got dinged as if it was two breaches.
okay. So I have a couple of clients where they have to get validated once a year, where they've got to do all their scans and PCI compliance and all that. And then I have another client, because they have credit card terminals in their space, they have to go through a monthly testing. So is this something where the credit card company tested them and failed them, or was this a malicious bad actor?
No, this was an actual, they got hacked.
Okay.
So what happened was they were bleeding credit card data. The credit card brands, they see this, right? They're able to figure out like, hey, we're getting all these fraud reports or stolen card reports. They do whatever magic math they do, and they see, hey, it all comes back to this location. Right. So then they require that you have what's considered a PFI, which is a payment card industry forensic investigation. Forensic analysis, we come in, we do the analysis and so forth. But yeah, and with those types of investigations, there's usually a big fine that comes along with that. Right. So not only are you paying for the forensics, and if there's almost guaranteed to be an attorney involved, notification,
IT expenses,
right? Lost time, right? Because obviously your focus is on this,
Yeah.
right?
So yeah, that's why I was asking, because the one client I just did one with in August, they had waited to send me the stuff to get their verification done. They had to do a firewall test and all that. They waited, and they were almost in danger of getting like their POS shut down, where they would not be able to accept payments.
Right.
And that was by their merchant provider.
Yep.
So
Yeah, they're pretty strict about that.
Yeah.
I'd say the other short story is earlier this year, an MSP, as a matter of fact, they called me for one of their clients. I guess what had happened was earlier in the year they had gotten hit with ransomware. Instead of doing a forensic analysis on it, they figured, hey, we've got backups, we'll restore, just move on. I want to say it was 3 to 6 weeks after attack number 1, they were hit with attack number 2. IT again said, hey, we can fix this. They fixed it. And then a month after that, attack number 3. And then it was at that point that they said, hey, maybe we're not the ones to do the analysis on this. So that's when I got called in. And that's usually the drum that I beat with why it's important to do the forensic analysis after an incident is, if you don't know how it happened and what exactly they did when they were in your environment, what are you securing against after the fact? Right? What are you protecting?
So You mentioned MSP, and I know that you don't do all of your work with MSP. So let's talk about, let's actually do this. Let's actually go back into your history because we didn't start with that. You were in law enforcement here in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm going to get the times and the stuff all mixed up, but I know that you were a part of SWAT.
I was.
And I know you were part of the Secret Service, but you weren't an agent.
Correct. So I was part of the task force.
Task force.
Right. So I was a local police department police officer here in Broward County. I'm not sure if you're allowed to say where, but
I tell everybody, well, Fort Lauderdale,
yeah,
folks.
Fort Lauderdale PD. I was with Fort Lauderdale PD. Yes, I was on SWAT, and then the last X number of years, I got assigned to the United States Secret Service Electronic Crimes Task Force. That's a mouthful. Say that fast a bunch of times.
Now, I mean, so how do you go from being a beat cop to that?
So I was in the detective bureau doing economic crimes, like
Okay.
financial crime stuff.
American Greed type stuff?
Yeah, it's not that sexy, unfortunately. It's really not that sexy. But having been in the computer industry prior to law enforcement, my captain came up to me and said, hey, the Secret Service, they have this task force. And I guess local departments will assign a police officer, and the Secret Service pays for the training. They send you for digital forensics training, and then you essentially work out of their office.
Okay.
So I was a Fort Lauderdale police detective, but I showed up every day down to the Miami field office for the Secret Service.
Nice.
And did computer geek stuff all day long.
All right. And then somewhere along the line, was it retirement from the police department, or did you see this is a better, nicer avenue to go down?
So I did the early retirement.
Okay.
So I am retired, but it was an early retirement, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just a polite way of saying that the private sector came knocking and kind of sweetened the pot.
Okay. So when that happened, I got to think that you immediately didn't run across MSPs as a segment to work with. So I assume you started a lot of your work with law agency related type stuff.
So yes. So funny, literally as soon as I made the decision to start my own business, I got a call from one of my contacts in the Secret Service, and they said, hey, we have this program in Alabama to teach law enforcement how to investigate cyber crimes, network intrusions, but we don't have an instructor. Are you interested? I was like, I literally just quit my job. So yes, I am. I just started a company. I'm interested. So from 2016 to about mid 2019, I was the curriculum developer and the instructor for the Network Intrusion Response Program in Hoover, Alabama. So it's a 3-week class teaching local law enforcement how to investigate cyber crimes and network intrusions and stuff of that sort.
Okay. Hoover, Alabama doesn't sound.
It's Birmingham. It's
okay.
Birmingham.
It still doesn't sound like a nice place to be.
It's what's funny is everybody says it. They're like, oh, Birmingham. I gotta tell you, it's a big city.
Yeah.
I love it. I think it's a great place.
It's a big city, but it's in Alabama.
It is. It's a bigger city than Fort Lauderdale, I think. It's pretty cool.
I know. And I'm sure I have listeners that'll be calling me out because
Why are you knocking Birmingham?
well, because I've got some listeners in Alabama. Because whenever I go to Georgia, they're like, "We're just across the state line. Let's meet up." Oh, look! As a matter of fact, there he is. Hey, wow. Hey, now.
He's like, easy.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever been to Alabama. I should go.
Check it out.
So, Mr. Hey Now, invite me. Give me a reason to show up in Alabama and not to watch the Crimson Tide. I hope they get a third loss this year, by the way. All right, so you teach this course, and let's see, you're starting to do more things.
Yep. So that kind of sprung me into the teaching environment, and then that kind of led to I did a 1-day, I think it was a 1-day course for judges down here in Florida, teaching them how to understand digital evidence in the courtroom. So that was cool, right? So, I mean, not only was it cool because I like to teach, but it was cool because now I know that I'm putting this information into not just attorneys' heads, but into judges, right? These are the ones that are sitting up there on the, making the decisions. So being able to explain what this means and why is the process sometimes slow.
I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat.
Yeah.
It's Alabama, not many reasons. Okay. So I was going to ask you about that because a lot of what we do here about digital forensics is always related to courts.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the courts, just like all other forensics, with the, the CSIs, when they did their stuff, they were always a little behind on understanding the technology. Oh, well, all that can be faked, in the labs and stuff. So I have to imagine that the digital forensics from a cyber perspective probably wasn't received that well in the courts, or was it?
You mean as far as when I taught the class?
Well, yeah. I mean, the judges.
So I mean, no, honestly, I think it was received pretty well. They were very receptive to it. You've always got a few that hate technology and don't want to go down that path, but I think it was received pretty well. Surprisingly, I got a lot of good questions. Right, I kind of thought that I was going to get up there and just drone on and move on to the next, but they asked a lot of good questions.
Mm-hmm.
They were truly interested, and I think that makes sense, right? I mean, they're making these decisions in the courtroom, and they need to know, or at least be able to speak authoritatively.
Okay. Now, how much of what you're doing now translates into you being called as an expert witness or an expert? I don't know
So
which side.
I don't know what the percentage split is. The bulk of the work that I do, what I really like is the incident response, right? A company gets compromised, I come in and I do that. I help them kind of work through that. But I also get a lot of what I call dead box forensics, right? That's lawyers and law firms that just need, hey, we have, right, maybe a handful of mobile phones that we need text messages from, or we have these computers, or I get a lot of, we think employee X may have been doing Y, right? We need to be able to prove this. Or we have contracts, right? We have 2 electronic documents. Party A says this is the real one. Party B says this is the real one. How do we kind of determine what's going on here? Or intellectual property theft. That's another big one with employment attorneys, where employees leaving and then magically a month before they leave, they transfer a bunch of data from the computer to a USB and then claim, oh, I didn't take anything.
Yeah, and there's no file tracking turned on. So that's one of those things where if you had the right logs turned on, you could go back and see.
Right.
So interesting you mentioned the digital documents, because I did have a law firm probably about 3 years ago. They were dealing with an equipment lease that a company was trying to get out of a lease, and they were trying to get into a new lease, and I forget which person did it, but somebody said, no, the lease started on this date, and then somebody said, no, it started on this date, and the logs of the scanner where they would scan the documents had the date stamping on them. But they were like, well, you can't go by the date it was scanned because that's not the date it was created. And this was not my client, so I had no access to it, but they were asking me to look at it. And
the raw files.
Well, yeah, how would you read this? I'm like, dude, I don't know. I mean, you got to get into their system to see. And that was the problem, is they were getting logs, but I don't think they were the actual raw logs from the system.
I get that a lot. I see that a lot. Well, attorneys will say, hey, we did this discovery, and here's what we got. And they send me a giant PDF of a bunch of scanned documents. I'm like, I can't tell you anything about this, right? This is a scan, right? Or a PDF version of the original document. We need those original documents, right? The Word document, or, I guess some people actually create stuff in PDF or in Adobe. That's possible, but either way, you need those raw.
Getting into that metadata.
Right.
The metaverse. all in there. So let me ask this. I know we're going all over the place, but because we talked about that, so a lot of us as IT providers get asked to do this stuff all the time. And listen, I know my limits, and I tell them, look, you're going to have to call a professional to get that deep. If it's just cloning a drive for preservation, yeah, I can do that. But I'm not going to dig into the logs of a hard drive and stuff. So how many IT providers like me call you and say, hey, we need your help? Are there out there versus how many try to do it on their own? And then you end up sitting across the court from them saying, you didn't do what you thought you were doing.
So I don't know that I've ever been on the opposing side, at least not in the courtroom, to an IT company that decided to do something on their own. I'm sure that day is coming.
I'll see you next week.
Yeah. It happens though, right? I don't know the exact percentage, but a lot of, and I get it, right? We're tech people, right? We want to figure stuff out, but I'm a firm believer in stay your lane, right? Know what you're good at and stick with it. I get calls a lot for awesome potential incident response scenarios, but if it's something that's just not in my wheelhouse, I'm a firm believer. I'm not going to say yes and figure it out because my reputation's everything. So I would rather say, you know what, this is not my forte. Let me see if I can find somebody for you.
Okay, so this takes us back to earlier, the discussion of there's software out there that we can get. And I did look at one, I don't think I wrote the name down, and it wasn't that Forenz IT, it was something else similar where the software was free.
Okay.
And then you could pay to get training. And the training was like $3,500 for this course, but it was like a 10-course thing to get fully certified.
Oh.
So, I mean, it was, I don't know, it was 30, 35 grand or whatever to get the training necessary to read all that stuff. So I've got to believe that there's a lot of tech companies that will get that free software. You said the open source stuff is good.
It's good.
But it's dumping information, hex files and stuff like that. I'm sorry, I'm not going to read it.
So I'm an analogy nerd. Right? I always try to think of some sort of an analogy. I would almost liken it to, you can go out and buy a really cool performance race car.
Yeah.
That doesn't make you a race car driver, right? You've got the cool car.
Yeah.
It's sexy. It has the capability. Do you have the capability? Right. And I think that's kind of where we're at with a lot of these, whether it be digital forensics, penetration testing, managed IT, whatever it may be. And I think it requires that skill set behind it.
So we've talked about what we try to do without you, and then so you mentioned digital forensics, incident response. So let's talk about the incident response in terms of what should happen, because again, the insurance companies are doing us a favor by telling our customers they've got to have an incident response plan. Now, all the ones that I've read are basically, if A happens, do B. Contact this person, shut down this. They're not really that detailed. But from your perspective, coming in after the fact, it's usually after we've done all our stuff. We've pulled the drives, set them aside for analysis. Then you come in. But what really is incident response from your perspective?
So I'll first touch on the incident response plan. Okay. I think it's important. Having a plan, that's key, right? Being prepared for something happening, kind of like fire drills when you were in school, right? You didn't just expect that the day that there was a fire, everybody would know what to do. No, they actually had a plan, right? We had the thing up on the wall that told you where you were going and whatnot,
right.
And you trained it, right? You tested it. You made sure that, hey, they know what they're doing. Little Susie's grabbing the fish bowl, right? He's going to hold the door open, so on and so forth, right? The idea is to have a plan, but not just a generic plan, a plan that's actionable. And that's the same thing with having an incident response plan is you need to have, if you're just downloading something off the internet and plugging that into your process, my guess is you probably haven't tested it, right? You got to test it and make sure, is it functional in your environment?
Well, that's part two to that, because I don't think because none of my people have tested. I can tell you that. It's not like I can walk in and let's rip out the power cord and go. So,
Right.
and then a breach, I guess, is hard to simulate.
Well, because there's so many different. A good incident response plan will also have what we call playbooks, right? And a playbook is the more detailed. If it's ransomware, if this, then that, right? If it's an email compromise, if this, then that, so on and so forth. Because there is no one generic. If I get hit with a breach, I'm going to do X. What kind of a breach, right? What's been impacted? What do we, right? So that's why you really have to have a detailed and an incident response plan that's tailored to your environment, right? It has to make sense for your environment. But again, the biggest takeaway is be prepared. It's going to happen, right? I hate to be the negative Nancy, right? You can have all the protective mechanisms in the world. At some point, it's going to happen.
Right. You know what? I'm going to let you finish before I go back to that question, because we'll be way off base. So having a plan, and then the next step is
Testing it.
testing it.
Testing the plan.
Well, we're not doing that. So next,
have somebody on retainer. have a company that you can call. But no, going back to the plan, I just want to touch on, because you see, and I think you had mentioned it, there's a lot of plans that they sound good, right? Because they say, if we get hit with X, preserve evidence and pull drives and do this. But a lot of times, if you ask the people that are in charge of doing that,
well, how do I do it?
Let's do it, right? So I've done what's called an FTX. So a tabletop is where you just sit around and kind of talk through, right? Hey, if you get hit with this, what are you going to do? I'm going to collect memory, and I'm going to get a disk image, and I'm going to do this. Okay, cool. Then we get to the FTX, which is where, hey, you just got hit with this incident. What are you going to do? You got that same guy who says, I'm going to do a memory dump. I'm going to collect an image of the hard drives. Okay, let's do it. Now you get the deer in the headlights. What do I do to collect memory?
Okay,
no,
that's
you're
what
the one who
I was
said
going to
you were going to do it.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you actually walk people through? Let's do the plan. Let's walk through. How do you do the log dump? Pull the drives. Well, if I pull the drives, we can't work. Well, that's part of your plan, right? So,
Yeah,
which is one of the reasons where my customer's like, well, we can't do that. I'm like, well, how are you going to know if it works if you don't test it?
Test it.
And, that means we have to have extra stuff. We got to pay for another, set of drives, another server.
Today, things are a little bit different. So years of old, it used to be pull drives.
Yeah.
Right. So when I would go in for, digital forensics or an incident, typically we were imaging the entire hard drive. Today, drives are just, I don't want to say they're too large, but it's unrealistic in a lot of incidents to image the whole hard drive.
Right.
So a lot of forensic firms have moved to doing triage, right? Whereas instead of going, if I'm imaging even just a 1 terabyte drive, that's going to take hours to image a 1 terabyte drive. And that doesn't give me any answers yet. Now I have to go process it and whatnot. Whereas if I do a triage analysis, which is where I go in and say, hey, I only need registry hives or maybe event logs or a certain file type or whatever it may be, I extract that, which takes a matter of minutes. And now I can start reviewing that data. And usually you can have answers in hours versus days, or sometimes minutes.
All right. So I was starting to think in a virtual sense where if you're uploading stuff to the cloud, a lot of times you're going to have a lot of that ransomware stuff follow up to an image if you're doing an image backup. So I don't know if that would help at all to download an image, but you've got to download it. So,
it depends. So with ransomware, there's no one answer, right? What I mean by that is, so a lot of the ransomware, again, depending on the type of ransomware, it typically doesn't disable the computer, right? Because they need the computer to run in order for you to be able to read the ransom note and try to recover the files, so on and so forth. So a lot of the, again, depending on the ransomware, a lot of the logs are still, some of the data is still going to be there, right? Now, to be fair, there are variants of ransomware that's the first thing they do is they disable the volume shadow, they delete backups,
delete the logs. And that's why I was thinking, if you had all that stuff backed up,
Oh
you
yeah,
could pull from the backup, at least up until the point of deletion, because now I know that probably isn't always the case, but sometimes you're going to have, right before those logs are deleted, those 1 or 2 lines that show, oh, this happened, and then you're done.
Yeah. Everything leaves a trace. So even an attacker deleting the logs, that leaves a log. Right? So that leaves a trace. That doesn't tell you exactly what they did prior, but at least now we have a time frame, right, or a date range to work with.
All right, so let's kind of bring this full circle. So you are a cybersecurity company, not an MSP, MSP adjacent.
Yes, I would say yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I've done, especially over the last couple of years, I've done a lot of work with and for MSPs.
Okay. I know you're big in ASCII. Well, I don't know how big you are in ASCII. I know you're in ASCII.
Involved, yes. I'm involved in ASCII.
And I
yes.
know some members
I'm
have
a big fan of it.
big fan.
Yes.
Big fan. Are you involved in a bunch of other groups, or how are you like marketing yourself out to our industry?
So I'm not doing enough.
Not doing it.
Other than ASCII, I'm involved in a couple of like legal groups because obviously I get a lot of work from lawyers and law firms. But I'm really not doing a ton of.
Do you want more work, or do you have enough?
If you ask my wife, she'll tell you I want more work. No, I do. I have room on my plate for more work.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the wife. In doing my research, I can't tell if she works for you or with you full time and does other stuff. So what's...
None of the above. So she owns a law firm.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So she used to do the cyber stuff, and then she just she kind of transitioned more to exclusively doing the business law and employment law. But she started her own firm a few years ago, and
Okay.
going very well.
Okay. So
She's my attorney.
Wonder how I read that. I think you were teaching a thing in 2020, and you were a teacher. She was listed there, and the third person.
Yeah. So we've done. So when she used to do the privacy stuff and the cyber law stuff, we did a lot of joint presentations and stuff together. Yeah.
All right. So it wasn't too awful.
No, you weren't. No, you weren't off. You weren't off at all.
All right. So you already mentioned a couple of things. You kind of enjoy this to a degree, but in terms of like on a regular daily basis, what's the number one thing you love to do as part of your gig?
So I love doing the investigative side. I love doing the incident response, but I would say probably what I get the most value out of is preemptively helping a client, right?
Okay.
So coming in and helping them develop that incident response plan, or telling them, hey, here's what we want to have in place. If or when something happens, let's get this in place. And that's one of those things that's, you don't get a ton of feedback on that until they get hit with an incident.
Right.
And then they go, oh, we're sure glad that we had X in place.
Well, nobody wants your help until they need your help.
No, I get it. I've many clients are like, we appreciate it. Thank you. I hope they never have to see you again.
Yeah.
And I get it. Right. Doing the incident response, it's a bad situation. So
Okay.
they don't want to have another one.
All right. So now let me do a sort of quasi Florida man thing where usually I'd ask somebody to come up with their version of Florida man to challenge a Florida man story that I found. But you are Florida man. You've lived here. So I can't really ask you to challenge Florida man because you're here. But I have to imagine that working as a Fort Lauderdale police officer and SWAT member, is there a Florida man story that you can tell us that,
But I can tell? I'm not sure. I've got a bunch of Florida man stories. I don't know if there's any I can tell. I'm trying to think how to redact this one. We
The
had
names and
yeah,
faces
definitely
have been
no
changed.
names. I'm trying to think how to tell it and it not be boring. We had a guy that OD'd
Okay.
on the way to the hospital. He basically expired several times. We get to the hospital, and the doctor assured myself and my partner at the time, this guy's not going to make. He won't make it through the night. If he does, he's going to be a vegetable. This guy's he's done. His body's cooked. Okay. I want to say less than 2 months later, this guy stole a what was it? Not a dump truck. I don't remember the type of truck, but he stole a big truck, an industrial truck.
Was that the cement truck that was going up and down 95?
With that had probably the one that hurt a bunch of police cars,
Yes.
and
It was just
he
ramming
stole
everything.
I'm drawing a blank, an ATM, like he pulled an ATM out of the wall and whatnot. Yes. Same guy. When they said the name, I'm like, not possible. The doc assured us that this guy was
Dude was
done
dead.
for. Yeah.
But no, I think that was it was either a Republic, not a Republic. What was Huizinga's company? It was either that company, the sanitation company, or the
Right.
cement truck Rinker. It was one of
Right. It
those.
was one of those large trucks. I remember
I
that.
remember that story.
But I, mean, I kid you not, it was, I don't know, less than 3 months prior to that he OD'd. It was,
Wow.
it was I'm not laughing because he OD'd. I'm laughing because, wow.
Because he lived and
Yeah,
did that.
he bounced right back apparently.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it from somebody else. This stuff really happens down here in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
And they don't all have to do with alligators. So, all right. Well, Brian, we're coming up to the hour here. I want to thank you for, coming in studio.
I'm excited that I'm the second person.
This
Very
will be
cool.
pretty good. So,
Feel honored. Feel very honored. This was fun.
This is good. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, Infosec Cyber, and it's just as simple as that. I will have the link in the show notes, but infoseccyber.com. If you would like Brian to help you with education, first of all, we would like to have our people not go through the incident.
Let's get squared away.
But if they do, and you need somebody to come in and do a true triage and incident response, this is the guy. So,
Thank you. Thank you again for having me on.
all right, Brian, thanks a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have, let's see, did we say we were staying for a post show?
Sure.
So we will continue here after the show exit, but we'll go ahead and start to sign off here. Again, folks, remember next week's show is not at the regular time of 8 p.m. Eastern. It will be at 10 a.m. And the reason for that is most of you are probably working half a day, if at all, and you're hitting the road to head home for Thanksgiving. So we're going to be here. Aaron Lawrence from Tech Gadget Canada and Eric Pinto from Soft Solder will be joining me. And I might have a brand new Net Ally tool that I will be showing off as part of that as well. I hope to have it. I got a shipping number, but it's shipping by ground. So,
Fingers crossed.
I don't know if I'll have it, but I hope that I do. So join us next week, folks, Wednesday, the 23rd, 10 a.m. Eastern for the Black Friday preview show. And that's going to do it, folks. Thank you very much for hanging out. And thank my good friend Brian, who you live pretty close, don't you?
I do. I'm pretty close.
Okay. Probably too close. So, let's see. Let me find my outro here. I'm in the wrong spot here. Yeah, this is how we do it live, folks. All right, we'll see you next week. And until then, holla. All right. That went pretty good. Pretty good. And we still got some people hanging out there. Chris, sorry about Alabama there. But Nick Saban needs to retire soon. That's the only thing I got to say about Alabama.
Sticking around too long?
No, he's probably not. But sometimes you get tired of people winning.
Except for the winners. They're not tired of winning.
That is true. Chris, by the way, I will be doing my Atlanta World Tour. I think it's December 9, 10, and 11 will be our Christmas at the cabin. I think I'm flying in that Thursday night. I will be in Atlanta Friday morning, then driving up to the cabin, and then driving back Sunday to head out Sunday night. So start planning to make your trek over somewhere close where we can visit. Anybody else that is in the Atlanta area? And when I say Atlanta, I'm going to be specific because it can't be all of Atlanta. So when I fly into the airport, stay at the hotel, I have some friends that I'm probably going to meet for breakfast in downtown Atlanta, and then I'll be heading up to the cabin, and that goes up through the Canton, Jasper, the Northwest corridor up to Talking Rock Mountain. So you kind of need to be on that path so that I don't get too delayed heading up to the mountain, because the whole purpose of me going up there is to spend it with the family. And it's not my family, it's her family. So I need to be there and be present.
So are we being invited to the cabin?
Sure, you can be invited to the cabin, yeah. Now, when you get to the mountain, you got to drive like 3/4 of a mile up a mountain. And it's twisty and turny, and you can't drive fast or else you might fall off.
Okay.
It's up there. But you might need to do a reservation, because I don't know how many. I think there's 15 of us this year at the cabin.
Oh, okay.
I might be doing a
Expect
podcast.
pictures.
Huh?
Pictures. Oh, yeah, do the podcast from the cabin.
We might podcast from the cabin. I got to talk to the nephew. So I've got a nephew that works in tech also, and he works for a pretty big company. So I got to see if he can help me with bringing some equipment up there. He lives probably an hour from there, so I'll reach out to him and see what we can do.
Cool.
He has a drone that he brings up all the time, and he takes drone pictures. And there's every year the family, last year they got T-shirts. I hope they don't do this year, but we had to go stand out on the way that they did the patio. There's no railing. I mean, this is Georgia country, people. There's no railing on the patio, so you can literally fall down the mountain. But we all go stand on the edge, and he sends their drone out and takes a picture of us at the cabin, and then he has the drone
like zoom out.
Yeah, zoom out, and we're all waving. I don't know. That's a cool annual thing.
That's pretty cool. The drones are pretty neat. You can get some cool pictures with drones.
It's a nice drone too. It's $300-400. It's not a cheap one.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's when it does, he can do it to where it's like he'll zoom in close and then zoom across the line, like a lineup and stuff, and there's no wiggle or bounce. It's got the stabilization.
That gyro something.
Yeah, so that's all. It looks smooth as it goes across, and then he can zoom it out, and he's pretty good with that thing.
That's cool.
I'm not.
No, I'm not. But yeah,
I don't do
I have a drone, but it pretty much flies itself.
You have one?
Yeah, and I still managed to crash it into the side of the house. Almost dumped it into the pool.
How do they drive themselves? Don't you gotta?
I don't know how to describe it. It's not as sensitive as drones of days past.
Okay.
Right, because it used to be you barely touch it and they go zipping off.
So
now it launches itself and it hovers. So if you turn left, it'll fly left. As soon as you stop turning left, it stops and it hovers.
It goes.
Yeah.
Okay.
My wife got it for me. She knew that I was. I'm not good at like games or stuff of that sort. So she knew which one to get me.
That's a nice wife.
She's pretty awesome. She's all right.
Honey, are you listening?
I'm buttering her up for something for Christmas.
Question in the chat. Yes, I'm actually flying in Thursday night and staying at a hotel and meeting people Friday morning for breakfast. But I will say this. I believe I'm getting in late, like 10 p.m. late. So unless you want. No, you can't even pick me up from the airport because I'm renting a car because I got to drive up to the mountain. So you can't meet me at the airport. You can't meet me at the hotel because I got to get some sleep. But Friday morning, I think I've got possibly breakfast and lunch. So there's that time Friday, and then I'll have to drive up Friday afternoon. I think I have to meet somebody in Canton, and then get up to the mountain. So that's it's a tight window.
And how long did you say you're going to be there?
So I'm going to be there till Sunday.
Okay.
So I fly in Thursday, so drive up to the mountain Friday, Saturday, leave Sunday afternoon. Last year, I left early enough on Sunday. My flight left at like 9. So I had to be at the airport at 7. So I left the mountain so that I could have dinner with somebody at 5. At somewhere near the park, the ballpark. I'm telling you,
Yeah,
you know.
I have no idea. No, just nod.
Maybe
Just
Chris
nod.
knows. Wherever that ballpark is near Atlanta, where is it the Braves? Atlanta Braves play? Maybe.
Sure.
All right. So the audio portion won't have this part of the discussion on, but the live show will. So I'm going to ask you a couple more questions about
sure.
the testing and stuff. So the true penetration testing. What I didn't ask was, you mentioned that you'll not only scan and see what's open, but you'll try to dig in and see what you can actually get into. As part of that testing, do you actually get in and do anything, or you just get to a point where you can say, okay, if I hit enter here, you're screwed?
Depends on the type of test. If it is an external only, meaning I'm only attacking internet facing systems, right, or IPs, we'll say. Once I have gained access, typically that's where we stop.
Okay.
Now, if it's an external and internal, right, or they say, hey, we want to see what damage could be done from an external attacker if he got in, then I'm going to try to move laterally throughout the network. I'll try to do a search for files. Now, for privacy reasons, you can't really search for PII. I can search for it, but I can't actually exfiltrate.
Okay.
So typically what you do is you leave some sort of a flag behind, or take a benign file or something along those lines to prove that you were there, or add a user or something along those lines.
Okay, so I've got one risk analysis test that I've got through one of my vendors, and they actually print a report, and they will list how many credit cards, how many social security numbers can be breached.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, they don't list those out. So is that kind of what you're saying? Is that you can say there is access to this much data? And
so I won't run one of those scans. So you can do like card scans.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like that's what that is. How do we say that? So that makes sense.
Okay.
In like if you're coming in as like an MSP and you're trying to show them like where they need to shore things up,
right,
you can run that scan. But that's a noisy scan, right? So I wouldn't want to run that on a system, just because it's noisy from an attacker's perspective. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out I'll try to locate where those files are stored. I'll try to locate where other sensitive information may be on that system, and then either leave like a flag behind, like a marker behind, or take a benign file from that directory.
So here's a question that I got from somebody a while back when we were talking about encrypted drives. So BitLocker is the encryptor of choice by many of us because it's built into Windows.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find interesting is that BitLocker only really helps if somebody takes it and then tries to log into it and then it's not accessible. But if they're getting into a live network and the drive is already opened,
it's encrypted, right?
So at that point, encryption means nothing. So I've got some other stuff that I do where I'm not using BitLocker, I'm using other stuff that will actually not allow access unless you're authenticated. It will actually hide. So it's only visible to certain users, that
Right.
sort of thing. So the penetration testing that you're doing, is it something where it will be able to find stuff that's hidden?
I think it depends on when you say it's hidden.
Uh-huh.
It depends on how it's hidden.
Okay.
If it's on the computer, it's probably discoverable. As a pen tester, if I'm there long enough and I'm going to do reconnaissance on that system, I'm going to try to move laterally through the network, but I may leave behind a keylogger. Or if I discover that, hey, this is accounts payable, or this is, somebody that deals with X, I might do some additional reconnaissance on that computer or that user, right? Hoping that I'm going to see you
At some point.
do this process.
Okay.
And I go, there it is. That's what we've got.
Okay.
But that's really contingent, right? That's dependent on what kind of time do we have, right? A lot of people they don't open their checkbooks and say, yeah, take as long as you want to do as much as you want during this pen test. It's usually a finite window, right?
An
do
hour?
This and this. Wow. That'd be really short.
I mean, I have to imagine that you've got to have 24 to 72 hours to do something.
So most pen tests, or at least the ones that I perform, I'm given at minimum a 4-week window. Now I've had a couple of them where they've said, hey, we waited till last minute. We have to have a report, or we have to have something delivered by this date. Okay, well now we're doing kind of a condensed penetration test. But no, most of my pen tests start at 4 weeks, right? Because I do that, and that's the difference between a penetration test and a vulnerability scan. If it's a vulnerability scan, I don't have to know anything about your company. You just feed me a list of IPs or domain names, and plug them in, hit go, and then I give you a report that shows you, hey, this says that this is vulnerable. With a penetration test, that first week, I'm doing OSINT, right, or open source intelligence and reconnaissance, learning about your company, right, spidering your web page and grabbing stuff from the site there, downloading any documents that you have on the web, looking to see what usernames are out there. Right?
So you're looking to see what's available just
trying to identify
Just
that
open
attack surface, right?
So
Right.
checking LinkedIn profiles.
Absolutely.
You hear that, listeners?
Facebook, LinkedIn. If it's a red team engagement, and when I say red team, the difference between a penetration test and a red team engagement is red team is I get to actually act like a real attacker, meaning the gloves come off. I'm not just trying to electronically break into your systems. I can also pick up the phone and call employees. I can send phishing emails, right? Whatever's at my disposal to try to exploit or infiltrate that environment.
So that's what we see in the movies, where people are actually, gathering that public information and either reverse engineering it or using it as a baseline to create, the sample passwords or whatever.
All the above. So I might do, so for example, if I was trying to pen test your company and I start doing some, OSINT, and I discover, hey, this guy does podcasts and he's involved in this, I'm going to start looking up, and that might be how I try to target you, right? As I send you something like, hey, we've seen you do all these podcasts. We'd like to invite you on this show. Just fill out this form. It's a password protected form. You just have to enable macros. I'm just making stuff up, but you get where I'm going with this.
And from now on, listeners, you won't have to pay to listen to the.
You'll never
to the
open another
podcast.
document.
No more YouTube.
Right.
Okay, so that makes sense, where you're going to now extract and pretend to be somebody. Hey, Mr. Johnson, is stuck in this meeting. He asked me to call, and can you turn on his computer for me?
Yeah, so knock on wood. To date, whenever I've done a pen test, if phone calls and emails have been part of the equation, I've never not been successful.
Oh,
yeah, never not been successful.
Well, that's
It's good for me. It's bad for you.
It doesn't sound good for the client.
Right? No.
So that stuff is real. That stuff happens.
It is. It is, and it's funny. It's usually the most non-technical methods that net the biggest results.
So that takes me, we should have talked more about education, because some of the education that we give, I know sometimes my customers are like, oh, I'll never fall for that. And you're like, really? Then how come, these companies are having this stuff happen all the time? So as part of the training that you would like to provide, are you giving them these real world scenarios of, if anybody calls and asks for this, or if you get this email asking for such and such, this is, an entryway into
Yes.
a breach?
Yep. But again, it depends, right? So I don't have like a cookie cutter. I don't have a cookie cutter employee awareness training program. It depends on what that organization wants. But yes, I've done that a few times where they did. They wanted me to go over physical pen testing. They wanted me to go over social engineering calls. So we did. We discussed it. And I have some videos that I show. And obviously I have a bunch more stories that I tell them of, here's what I did. They're like, oh my God, yeah, I would have fallen for that.
All right. That's the stuff we need to know. So, all right. What is this? Oh, my glasses. Do you think Ubiquity's identity system, with everything it touches from the network, access control, card charging, and more, is going to be risky to use? So I don't know what the Ubiquity identity system is. Do you?
I've never heard of it. I don't know.
I have to believe, let's see, he mentioned access control and card charging. So
just from the way he describes it,
that sounds like,
yes.
That sounds like a lot of the stuff all of these companies are doing, that sort of thing, and smart charging, access control where it's on the network, and card readers are easy to get access to, easy to fake.
Yes.
That's been proven here. How many years have they been, getting gas cards, and stuff like that with those card readers?
Yes. So it's funny that you would bring up the card readers. So we'll see. In theory, I might be the proud owner of a Flipper Zero in the next couple of weeks. It's a wireless hacking multi-tool. So it does NFC, infrared, Bluetooth. What else? I'm drawing a blank.
So you could literally have this device in your pocket and walk by and grab stuff?
That's kind of the misnomer, right? That's just one of the things is, even with a real card duplicator, right, or an RFID card cloner, you still have to almost practically touch it, right? So I have one that I bought that I thought I was going to use on penetration tests, but you literally have to touch the card.
Okay.
It's not like in the movies where you can be 3, 4, 5 feet away, or at least I've never seen one function that way.
So let me ask this. So a while back, I'm not going to say how I got it, but I got one of those RFID wallets.
Yeah.
Because the fear is that, somebody can read the card, walking by and stuff like that. But if you're saying that you've got to literally have access to it, is it really?
So yes,
RFID is really something we have to worry about?
I could bump into you if you have it hanging on your chest or hanging from the belt.
Like a tourist thing where
right.
they hang.
If you have a lot of business, they have it here. You see the employees hanging around their neck, or they have it on the little
like an access card.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I'm thinking door access cards. You're talking about credit cards.
Well, that's what I was thinking. But yeah. Now that I know, access cards, computer access control cards. I've got a client that has that. In order to log in, they've got to plug in their card. So I think into their building, I've got an access card for their building into the building and to the server room. So I keep that in there. All right, so that was good.
Sure.
All right, Chris, thank you for hanging out and asking questions. I don't know if you want to
have to Google
expand on the Ubiquity thing. I don't use Ubiquity, so I don't know what it is. If you're still there, I don't know if you're still there because I see we've got 3 people watching. Thank you for hanging out. 4 people. Look at that. Somebody just hopped on. If you just hopped in and joined the show, you're watching Marvin B. and Bryan Barnhart. We're talking about After the Hack. I don't know what one said is. Oh, and there's a link. Oh, there we go, which we can't go to.
I'm going to check it out later. UI.com.
UI.com/UID. Let's see if I can bring that up right now. Oh, there was last week's guest. Anya Khan, folks. Go visit her site. Unified.
Magical IT experience.
Magical IT experience. Oh, I want to watch an overview. Seamless employee onboarding and permission management. Secure multi-factor authentication. Consolidated network and physical access. Oh, interesting. One-click Wi-Fi and VPN.
Sounds cool.
Interesting. Here's the question. What is Unify Identity? Unify Identity provides individuals an intuitive and secure interface to access the organization's entire information technology while radically simplifying I hate when they do that. Radically simplifying IT management for admins.
I'm going to have to look into this.
All right, Chris, we'll research this and we'll probably have to do a show on this. Chris, you may have to come on the show. I know you don't like coming on here, but somebody that's actually using this Unify ID, let's chat about it. Let's see how magical it is. All right, folks, that's going to do it. We're going to go ahead and end off the show. Thanks for hanging out again if you've stayed this long and listened to the rest of the live show. Again, we'll be back next week, not at 8 p.m., but at 10 a.m. for the Black Friday preview show. Cool. Go to itbusinesspodcast.com, click on the Amazon link, and support the show. And that's it. And until next time, holla.